Hello and welcome to the final chapter in the InRetroSpect Tomb Raider Special. I am Daniel Frost, and I have brought along for the ride with me Sam Turner, Chris Darby, and Peter Willington. Over the past few weeks, we have traversed the cliffs of Tomb Raider's origins, trodden the precarious balance beam of Lara's impact, explored the turning points of the Tomb Raider labyrinth, before climbing to the top of Lara's accomplishments from the screen to the page. If you have missed any of these, they can still be found on iTunes, the Zune Marketplace, and at InRetroSpectPodcast.com. This then brings us to today, the end of our road, our chance to grab that final article, solve that final puzzle, and take one final leap into the unknown with our fearless heroine. This week, we take a look at the series as a whole. We discuss where it brought us, where it's going, and what effect it has had on the games we play today. Welcome to the concluding part of InRetroSpect. To kick things off today, guys, I want to dive right in at the deep end and ask you what's the first thing you think of when you think of Tomb Raider. Chris, what's the first thing that pops into your mind when you think of the great Lara Croft?
Backtracking, going over the same ground repeatedly, thinking you've got it and then hitting another dead end and having to go back on yourself again. And as I spoke about in my show, it's that sense of reiteration, of re-exploring the same landscape, looking for something different in it in order to find a way to press onwards. That's what I think is very much resonant with the Tomb Raider series, and what I think kind of, in my eyes, sets it apart from any other kind of iconic series in video gaming.
When someone mentions Tomb Raider, that my instant thought actually is like walking very slowly, holding the shift key, walking very slowly towards the edge of a sort of platform, and then taking three big, very exaggerated steps backward, and then holding the run button and the jump button and absolutely bricking it, just so that I can always ensure that I'm doing the maximum leap possible. Like, I know that sounds quite an intricate thing, but whenever Tomb Raider's mentioned, that's the first collection of thoughts. I kind of have this very rote, very mechanical exploration of the environment that kind of put me off the first 5 games. But it's that very sort of not being able to explore the world as fluidly as I'd want to, having to kind of make a very thoughtful choice as to knowing exactly how many steps I had to make in a certain direction, and these very systematic presses of buttons of the keyboard. That's, to me, Tomb Raider.
For me, it's the fluidity and it's the speed at which she moves around. So it's interesting that when you've played it, you've kind of played it in a very different way. You
came to the series quite late, didn't you?
I did. I mean, I didn't come in until Legend. That was when I first had my experience with Miss Croft.
I think that's a really interesting point, though, that Pete just made, is the fact that when I think of Tomb Raider as well, I think of something like Pete, the sense of it being exact. And the earlier Tomb Raider games are very staccato. There's lots of stopping and starting, turning, making sure you've got the alignment exact, almost like you're docking a space shuttle, I suppose. Whereas in the later Tomb Raider games, where you don't, unless you want to, you don't even have to hold an action button to ensure that Lara's hanging from an edge. You'll just do it automatically. It's more melodic and more balletic, I suppose. There's more of a rhythm about it.
Sam, how about you? Is it, when you think of Tomb Raider Lara Croft, I mean, we've all kind of mentioned the way she kind of moves around in the game. Is that what sticks out for you, or is there something different that grabs your attention?
It's definitely movement for me. That's what I think of when anyone mentions Lara Croft, is that mixture of gracefulness but yet aggressiveness from this female heroine. But it's definitely a feeling which is tinged with frustration. I think trial and error is something that I really associate when anyone mentions Tomb Raider or Lara Croft. It's that art of perfecting distances and getting the rhythm just right and the locations. Even in the later games, when some of these problems are a bit more ironed out, it can still be a really frustrating experience to really play through a game through trial and error, when really this should be an experience that is rhythmic and, as Chris said, melodic. And when that breaks and when you snap out of that rhythm, Tomb Raider can really be a punishing game and really have an effect on you. But it's all about trial and error. It's all about perfecting and judging distances. And that's what I always think about when anyone mentions Tomb Raider.
I'd like to know what you guys think. So we've all played a number of different games, a number of different Tomb Raider games, and I think we've all played games, some of them which were very good, some of which maybe had disappointing aspects. I want to know what features, I mean, we've talked about the way she moves around, but what other features make a great Tomb Raider game? What is it that you look for? What is it that maybe certain games were missing that meant they didn't live up to the level that they had done in the past? What are the main features of a great Tomb Raider game?
I guess that kind of depends on what you want from a Tomb Raider game. For me, what I really like is when Lara's being guided very specifically. So my kind of favorite in the series is Legend. And it's absolutely because there's really only one, maybe two paths that you can go on. The second path being an area to go and find some special little trinkets for the real explorers. But the game itself is, exceptionally narrow. I remember in the London stage in which you're in the
I think it is the British Museum. Yeah, you break into it basically.
Yeah.
I know, it's I don't know if it is the British Museum, but it is a museum. It's an old museum.
It is it is a museum in Britain, and there are sections in that are just, you are just completely funneled, and the game makes absolutely no kind of illusion as to the fact that it definitely wants you to go down this one area. And for me, like, the exploration aspect isn't really, I think I don't really like true exploration in Tomb Raider games. I don't really like all of this backtracking. I'm not a huge fan of having to try and figure out where I am within this game world. What I really want is, I suppose, is basically for somebody to attach a £5 note onto a string and sort of pull at it, and I need to chase after it. That's kind of, for me, where the Tomb Raider games excel in kind of telling a very straight story and showing you all of these wonderful things, and not marring that by any kind of super difficult exploration and mapless navigation.
So you kind of basically prefer a Tomb Raider game where you're outside the puzzle looking in, rather than inside the puzzle trying to find your way around it, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer it wasn't a puzzle at all.
Yeah, but of course, every level in a sense has to have an element of the puzzle, even if it's very simple. I mean, otherwise it would just be a very straight sort of journey from beginning to end. I don't know. I'd probably have to kind of disagree with you to an extent. That, I mean, I agree that like Legend and Underworld, they're quite beautiful games to look at. I mean, the landscapes are just absolutely gorgeous. Obviously, in comparison to like the earlier games where there was that sense of repetition and things which kind of didn't help you try and find your way. But like, I was playing Tomb Raider 2 recently, and you put so much. I mean, like, literally, I'm playing it late at night, say, and I know I can't save it because I know that if I load it up tomorrow, I won't remember where the hell I am. Because I'm halfway through a sequence of switches and things, and I need to know exactly where I've got to go next. But you have to do all this sort of, I don't know, I suppose, sort of like all these like sort of like sums and things or figures in your head and think it all through. You've literally got to mentally map where you are and everything, where you've been and things constantly, which I don't think you really get with as much with Legend and Underworld.
This might seem silly, but there's one thing in the original Tomb Raider games that I actually missed a lot when I was playing Anniversary and Legend. And that is, when you press start on the early Tomb Raider games, your inventory, or the pause menu, is Lara's passport.
Yeah.
Now, that for me says so much about who Lara is and what she has available to her when she effectively pauses from Tomb Raidering. But I think it said so much about her at that time, the fact that you paused and it was her passport rather than a pause menu screen, which I thought it just says so much about her character and what she does and how dedicated she is to the job, that the first thing she looks for in her pack is her passport, because she's just looking for the next place to go, or it just holds that wealth of information of those stamps of every single country that she's been to and every single experience that she's had. It's almost her own little private journal. It was such a poignant touch that made these games, the early games, feel about taking in the journey, feel about travelling huge distances. Whereas in like Legend, you jump from one place to another and it never really feels like you have any consequence. You move from Ghana to Cornwall, and other than the landscapes, they don't really feel like they have much architectural individuality. The enemies are all still the same, the puzzles are the same, but that just one little touch in the early game of having that passport spin around and come towards you really just added that sense of space and size to what Lara was doing.
Sam, one of the reasons I wanted to get your opinion on this is because I know you've played a lot of the games across a number of different platforms, going back to the originals with the PlayStation and that generation, as well as the new games on the next generation of consoles. But also, you've also played, I understand, Underworld on the Nintendo DS, as well as Guardian of Light, the one that was released on the PSN and the XBLA last year. From seeing these games come from different platforms and different styles, what are the aspects that really work from each different platform?
There is something that's sustained across all the platforms, and that is the ability of Lara and her experience of exploration. Even on the DS, there's a great feeling of traversing large areas and exploring and really taking control of a character, even though all you're essentially doing is press A up, A left, or A right, or B down. It's a much more simplified version of the console, but obviously it's very limited to what the DS can do, but it feels no less satisfying getting around and exploring areas and finding puzzles and finding ways out of situations. In Guardian of Light, you have this isometric point of view, which takes away from the exploration a little bit. The focus really isn't on jumping from blocks to blocks or climbing up huge towers or swinging from ropes, but it still does exploration exceptionally well in the cooperative play between yourself and Totek, when you're using his spears to climb up to higher levels, or you're using your grappling hook to help Totek get to switches that you need to activate to get obstacles out of your way and those sort of things. It does that really, really well. But the problem is, what Tomb Raider does exceptionally well in every single game, which is exploration, it also seems to do combat not very well in every single game as well. On the DS, it's exceptionally flat, and enemies are about as inspired as a ham sandwich. And Guardian of Light's combat is also backs to the wall, spray and pray, gunning. Never really has, for me anyway, Tomb Raider ever been able to, across all of the platforms, find a decent way to combine this excellent level of exploration with a actual steady and sustained system of combat. There's never been a balance that strikes it right for me. I mean, in Legend, if you consider it, or indeed even in Underworld, you press a button and you lock onto the target, and then you just press another button and you shoot and you kill that target. And that to me seems like quite a weak system of play for a character who, up until that point, you have a lot of independent control over. And when you play a lot of the games on different platforms and ranging over the years, that divisive nature between these two sort of systems of play really starts to begin to show.
Actually, what I'd really like to see is a Tomb Raider game with no real combat or anything like that, no direct combat, because Sam, you're totally right. It's I guess the one key element across all of the games. I certainly can't think of a Tomb Raider game that hasn't featured exploration as its absolute key, the backbone kind of running through all of it. And so why do they feel that combat is something that needs to be done? It doesn't really add anything to any of the stages. It just kind of breaks up the flow and is kind of a bit frustrating, I think.
I've just recently completed Underworld, and all the way up to playing Underworld, my view was, when playing Tomb Raider, that you didn't really need to have a story. I didn't really care about Lara Croft. I didn't really care about the story. I didn't really care about all this menagerie of people that were put into the mix, as it were. All I cared about was solving puzzles and finding artifacts and just getting through the level that way. To me, it was like doing a very complicated and very colourful puzzle, I suppose. But it's this idea of it's a narrative in Tomb Raider, establishing a narrative with Tomb Raider. I still don't know, really, because what tends to happen in my eyes is that the more they place an emphasis on a narrative, a story, they lose emphasis on the puzzles and the sense of the unknown and the mystery surrounding it, I suppose. But it's this idea of a narrative and a story in the Tomb Raider universe. I don't think they've kind of got it yet. They've either got to put it in completely, or it's got to be completely kind of faded out and kind of be back to how it was in the original series of games, with its much more emphasis on puzzles and less about narrative.
But that's the thing for me, is like, I've never played a Tomb Raider game and finished it and gone, well, the puzzles in that game are really, really great. I've never retrospectively thought about puzzles in Tomb Raider games. Once I've conquered them, that's it. That was particularly challenging. I felt good about solving that, yes. But once I've done it, then it's out of the way. Now the story can progress. And a good puzzle does its bit to, in my mind, to challenge you, but it also straddles that fine line between challenging but not really doing anything to majorly break up a lot of the pace of the narrative. And that for me is when Tomb Raider really starts to really become quite frustrating for me, when I'm enjoying a narrative, when I'm enjoying part of the story, or I'm enjoying the thrill of the chase, but I'm stuck doing a puzzle for half an hour. And suddenly the whole timeline of the game becomes a little bit out of kilter. That I've been doing something for half an hour, but yet my enemies have been happy just to sit there and wait for me to get from one bit to the other. And gameplay mechanics also, the longer you spend in a puzzle, start to become weaker and weaker and less solid. Cameras become more frustrating. Jumping mechanics also become a lot more unhinged. There's one bit in Legend where I just sat up and went, oh wow. And that's when Lara Croft pointed a gun at Amanda and shouted, "Where is my mother?" And that quite literally took my breath away, because I never expected it to happen. But that's never happened to me with a puzzle. And in a way, for me, sometimes the puzzles can really be what gets between me and Lara Croft.
Yeah, but surely though, by that same token, you don't want to have a game where you just blitz through it.
Oh, no,
Otherwise,
no.
it becomes an arcade game, and you might as well just watch a film. And there's nothing memorable about the game itself. The only thing you remember that has any resonance is the cutscenes. With Tomb Raider, to learn my passage to those cutscenes, I have to solve something within a level. It's not just a simple case of making it through the level without dying. There's something within there as well that I have to think about. I think kind of uses more of my cognitive faculties than merely just jumping from one place to another, to another, to another in a kind of an arcade sort of fashion.
I think it's how much time you've got to spend on a specific puzzle, for example, that really does break up this naturalistic story that's being woven. So what I really, really dislike is having to go back to a specific area multiple times, or worse, constantly backtracking from one place to another because I've missed a switch or something like that, and not being able to figure out where it is that I need to go. I don't think it's weird. I don't think it's the puzzles that I have a problem with at all. It's these moments where the game kind of loses the great design it usually has. When an item that you have to pick up, for example, when that's kind of hidden away somewhere, like I played the PSP version of Anniversary, right? And I also played the PS2 and the 360 version. Like, I've tried all three versions. And in the PSP version, there were levers that I just completely walked past, and then I couldn't get past a specific area because I just didn't know that they were there. So I spent half an hour, 45 minutes wandering around the rest of the environment going, well, what have I missed? And then for me to then come back to that point and go, oh, it's just because it's kind of because of the low resolution of the PlayStation Portable in comparison to the 360 version, it just didn't stick out amongst some slightly wobbly, dodgy textures. So that kind of breaks the experience for me. It breaks the illusion. So for me, the thing that I really hate about Tomb Raider, and I think it has been in actually every single one of the games to some extent, is when the game kind of doesn't live up to its own superb design. It's when it glitches out, because it's so important for that game to be perfect. Because if you aren't, the inch perfect jumping that you're required to do, when you can't do that through no fault of your own, that then suddenly becomes a major issue, I would argue.
How did you find Underworld, by the way? Because talking about how clear holds are and things and directions, one of the things about Underworld that set it apart from Legend was the fact that holds were often at times camouflaged into the wall as much. They weren't as easy to kind of spot. Did you have any problems with that at all?
Yeah, that game got traded in after 3 levels.
Oh, you see, I love that. I think because the thing that often annoys me about Tomb Raider is when you're playing a level that doesn't look like an environment that's kind of fallen into ruin. It looks like something you're on a film set that's been built for you, and like it's an assault course that's been made for you. Now, I agree with Sam talked about this in the first episode, that you are playing host to the parlor tricks, and there are tricks and there are traps and things that you have to kind of solve. But some of the levels are just ruins, and I used to just hate it. I thought, why, how, what in the design of this building meant that there was a conveniently placed pole for me to swing on? You know, that it seemed that they had built this for me.
Yeah,
And I don't like that sense of hand holding, I suppose. There has to be a logic to me as to how this has fallen into such ruin. To be fair, they do that in some places, but in others they don't. I mean, like, we were having this discussion, going back to the discussion we were having with Sam. For me, whenever I think of, like, famous levels of Tomb Raider or key levels or memorable levels, I don't think of any from the newer games because I haven't played them long enough, because the experience with them is always so short. Like, I've just completed Underworld. I did Underworld in 3 nights of playing Tomb Raider 2, several weeks of just evening playing, and I've played that game before, whereas I played Underworld for the first time, blitzed it. It's so easy in comparison. Because of that, I don't have any memorable levels. However, I do remember the story points more. They're the things that are more memorable for me. Whereas in Tomb Raider, I remember being at school and people going, oh yeah, Venice, brilliant, yeah, that's a really cool bit in Venice. Oh, the Opera House, yeah, in Tomb Raider 2, brilliant, yeah. But there was no real focus on the story then. And the decision that the Tomb Raider developers have to kind of make is, can we really give them 50-50, or does one take precedence over the other? Is Lara's quest based on the story of, like, her own personal story, like they did with Underworld? It's all about the quest to find her mother and to complete what her father didn't do, and that came with the relics, or to have a personal story that comes from the experience of finding relics, as it did with the earlier games.
The thing about signposting and really making it obvious where you go in the levels is, for me, that says something about Lara. It says something about her character, which is pretty much missing from a lot of the first sort of generation games, where Lara would walk into a room and she'd say nothing, but know exactly where it is that she would have to go, exactly how to solve the puzzle, but not communicate any of this to the player, making it very difficult to feel connected with her and know what she was about, in sort of a sense, as a Tomb Raider. If you think about the hand-holding not as the developers going, we want you to enjoy the experience, you don't want anything to disrupt the rhythm, but instead think of it as Lara going, well, I know where it is to go because I've been doing this my whole life, and her kind of going, this is the way we need to go. This is how these ancient structures were built. This is what I've already seen by looking at this wall. Just like a wall climber or someone who climbs cliffs will stand at the bottom and plot their route and know which way to go. That sense of bits of ledges glowing is almost the augmented reality that someone in that situation will put upon themselves and plan that route to go ahead. If you think about it as it being Lara but not the developers, it really starts to say something about who she is and contextualizes almost her personality. And that's something that's totally missing from even things like Anniversary and even the earlier games, where she would just walk into a situation and just be kind of like, well, it's up to you, I'm not going to help you at all with this.
That's a really interesting point, actually, and I think it's compounded by the fact that this is a third-person game. That's actually something I'd not properly considered. That's really, really interesting. Because I was actually going to mention the fact that when I climb, I don't just jump up and just assume that I'll get to the top somehow. I have to kind of stand at the bottom and find my route, plot my route up there. I think that's really interesting. I think that's something that can really be explored further, I suppose, in studies into what extent your playability of an avatar or a character in a game is an extension of yourself, or you're really, the character, I suppose, is a conduit to how their actions speak louder than their words.
I'd like to take the conversation in a slightly different direction now. Rather than talk about the content of the game, I'd like to discuss kind of the influence that the Tomb Raider series has had right from the start when it first came out, and the influence it has had from then, but also as the games have progressed. I was reading an interview with the founder and director of Quantic Dream, David Cage. When asked what he thought the most influential game of the PlayStation was, he said he found it hard not to mention Tomb Raider because it was one of the first games to reach people beyond the community of hardcore gamers. Do you guys agree that it could be argued that what Tomb Raider did was perhaps even create the birth of the casual gamer, where it was a game that could be enjoyed by both the hardcore gaming community as well as new people who just enjoyed your usual games of Sonic, but they had more adult game now, which was just as fun for them?
No, Tomb Raider wasn't the game that did that, really. If you look at the kind of PlayStation historically, and like that's an era I'm pretty familiar with, the game that did that was Wipeout. The games that were doing that kind of thing, yeah, like Wipeout, Metal Gear Solid. It was your Ridge Racers and Gran Turismos and stuff like that. Tomb Raider definitely came along and was accepted wider, but Cage is misinformed if that's what he thinks really opened it up to a larger audience. I mean, if you think about it, think about all of the people historically who have played Super Mario Brothers, the original Super Mario Brothers. Like that actually opened up video games to a massive population. So I think he's kind of wrong on that one. That said, I think if he'd have changed his wording a little bit and said that Lara Croft was the most influential character of that generation, I would 100% agree with him, because Lara Croft went global. Like, it didn't matter whether or not you played the games, and most people probably hadn't. You know, most people who had an opinion on what Lara Croft was and what she stood for and what the team behind her was doing with feminism, with sexuality in games, with corrupting our youth. Most of those people probably hadn't been to St. Francis's Folly or got to the ending of the first Tomb Raider or whatever, but they knew who Lara Croft was because she was the star of her own magazine. You know, she was in The Face. She was splashed across red tab newspapers. Lara Croft is exceptionally important in that way, and in that regard, yes, on the PlayStation and actually David Cage, the Saturn, where she made her first appearance, yes, like the character was extremely important, and the character brought games to a much wider audience without really legitimizing it. But the game itself was it still was very much part of a small hobby, a specialist hobby that still quite a few people were into compared to now. I don't think that Lara Croft hasn't legitimized games. I just don't think that Tomb Raider legitimized games. The character itself kind of brought up all of these ideas, and bundled in with that is the game of which she's a part. But taken alone, no, the pure sort of mechanics and presentation and controls and blah blah blah, all that sort of stuff. No, the game itself is an extremely hardcore, still very niche, very punishing, high requirement adventure title that was a third person 3D platformer in a landscape where the only other 3D third-person platformers were Super Mario 64 and Bubsy. It's so niche, and to say that it kind of went beyond that, I think that's putting a very rosy view on what IDOS were putting out.
Okay, well, what would you just say to the statement that it could be argued it was one of the first adult games? It was one of the first games that told the mainstream audience that games are no longer just for kids. As you're saying, it is quite a hardcore game, but it still hit that mainstream and became such a huge success. Could it be argued that maybe its role, if it wasn't bringing in the casual gamer, that it told the mainstream audience that these games weren't just for kids anymore, that they were an adult hobby?
In some ways, yes, but then, as in, it brought sexuality to the fore, and let's be honest, that's the big thing that it kind of issue on. But I mean, you go back a little bit, and Snatcher and Policenauts, for example, both two Hideo Kojima joints, they were mature games, and they were out years and years and years before.
But did they make the same impact in the mainstream that Tomb Raider did?
Yeah, in Western audiences, no, but in Japan, yeah.
But other than an age limit, Tomb Raider isn't a mature game. It's not telling any theme. It's not addressing themes. It's not really telling a story that is in any way mature, like you would sort of assess a mature game like now, like LA Noire and things like Heavy Rain, where it actually looks at mature themes like kidnapping and looks at rape and murder. Those are themes that are only deemed to be able to be understood by a mature audience. In the first original Tomb Raider, a god who has been locked in a ice prison for the past umpteen years has escaped and wants to take over the world. Now that's been the storyline for every juvenile video game since the 1960s. Other than an age rating, it's definitely not a mature game, and if anything, the games have got more casual and less emphasis on trying to be mature as the games have gone on. The impact they've made, and the impact they made in those early days, was in franchising, was in taking a commodity and taking a product and going, right, we've got to do something about this, and we've got to market this person. And that's completely what Tomb Raider changed about the whole industry, the fact that it was all about the figurehead. It wasn't about the game anymore.
Just to go back to our first InRetroSpect episode, where we talked about when we first played Tomb Raider, me and you, Sam, we said that, I talked about the fact that I got lost in the first level. I didn't really understand it. You talked about it. You had your original interest in Tomb Raider came from a juvenile perspective. Mm-hmm. There was a sense that both me and you, we weren't ready for it at that age.
Oh, no.
And I agree that it isn't anything to do with any themes. This idea, of Natla, this Atlantean sort of god coming back, and we have to kind of defeat her. I agree, but there is something about it that is adult. And right, you're gonna have to stick with me with this one. It might seem a bit of an abstract model, but I'm gonna run with it. I went shopping the other day at a supermarket, and I need cereal. I needed cereal, and I went into the cereal aisle, which nowadays is like, it's huge, the cereal aisle. And what made me laugh was that you got cereal bars, you got cereals, but opposite that there was an aisle that was called adult cereals, and which kind of maybe what a strange title, adult cereals. There aren't any sort of swear words titled on the cereal. There's no sort of Patreon models on it. But they call them adult cereals. They're saying, well, children, these aren't for children, but a child can eat this. But it's kind of like a Tomb Raider being an adult game. Yes, on paper, it's a cereal nonetheless, no different to any other cereal, but its ingredients, what make it, for some reason, supermarkets are saying that children of a certain age cannot take this cereal. And it's one of those strange things with Tomb Raider as well. Tomb Raider is an adult cereal. And I have to kind of agree to some extent with what Cage is saying, because Tomb Raider, as we were talking about earlier, this idea that Tomb Raider, in the earlier games, you don't necessarily play Tomb Raider for its story, because there wasn't really any. You could play any level in any order, really. It wouldn't really matter. The levels themselves are quite dense, and as you say, Pete, they are quite punishing. But the levels themselves can, you can just pick any level and just go through it. It doesn't really matter, kind of like you would on an original kind of casual game experience, which is kind of become now. You can just pick a Tomb Raider Legend level, an Underworld level, and just blitz through it. There is this kind of synthesis of the two there, that the levels aren't really very well held together, perhaps, in the earlier games.
But I think what we're really trying to define here is whether we mean mature, which is well, how we define mature is kind of
that's it. Yeah, how do we define mature?
Because what you're talking about really is complexity. If you give this game to a kid, well, I don't know. I think we're kind of underestimating youth. You know, it's. I mean, I had, as I said, like, you know, as I was talking about when we did the first episode of this, my friend was, you know, about my age, and we were pretty young at the time, and she was brilliant at it. You know, she was brilliant at the Tomb Raider games and could absolutely blitz through them. So there is a maturity in terms of traditionally it's only really adults that can grasp where they are situated within an environment, but at the same time that doesn't instantly make something mature. That makes something difficult, or that makes something hard. The thing is, though, that the thing that I think Cage is maybe trying to get towards is that the idea of sexuality is traditionally within the realms of maturity at the same time, and whether or not you kind of agree with that kind of sentiment. I mean, if you go and talk to Alan Moore, maybe he doesn't, but most people, I would argue, would kind of say that if you want to explore sexuality, maybe bump that up to a 16, 17, 18-year-old game. And I think...
So are you saying that if you play Tomb Raider and you don't snigger, you're mature enough for it?
I think so. I think it's that kind of... I think what Cage is talking about is Cage has got this idea that... and obviously I'm putting words in his mouth here, but I think Cage has got this idea that somehow Lara Croft was instantly this highly complicated, strong female role model, and in reality, she probably wasn't. I think that people have gone on to interpret who and what she is, and she became a symbol of discussion because we'd never had to have that conversation before, and you know the snowball keeps rolling, and all of this sort of myth kind of keeps surrounding her, and suddenly she was this kind of paragon for feminism or maybe exploitation within games, and we kind of had to have that discussion. But I certainly don't think it's the first big mature PlayStation title. You know.
I think it's not necessarily that he's saying that it was the first mature title. I think what he's saying is that it was one of the first titles that maybe the style of game was restricted usually to the more of a hardcore gaming community, and it's one of the first games which, whilst still keeping those values, kind of broke free from the hardcore gaming community and broke into the mainstream. But as well, this comes in with the same time as the PlayStation. The PlayStation was very much, as you say, with Wipeout, it's very much marketed as the adult. This wasn't a console for children anymore. This was something that could be enjoyed for adults. When Tomb Raider launched, it became a symbol for it and said, this is a new type of game. We've got more opportunities now and we can hit a bigger audience. We're not limited to make these games. We're not limited to this small community of hardcore gamers who appreciate what we're doing. This allows us to really spread our wings and let everybody enjoy this type of game.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that Tomb Raider did, was bring in a much bigger audience to this type of game. We've now discussed where the series has come from, what the influences have been. We're now going to discuss where it's going. Next year, the 10th game in the Doom released, entitled simply Tomb Raider. This series takes us back to Lara Croft's origins and gives her a backstory we have not yet seen before. But what I'd like to ask you guys is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited for this game are you actually? I'm going to start with you, Pete.
I am Tomb Raider 10 excited. I mean, it all looks really exciting, doesn't it? I mean, yes, it's another reboot. Yes, I can understand this. People thinking that, oh, well, I guess that I guess that Lara Croft needs another facelift, and they're just making her younger and sexier, and it looks even more exploitation with all of the grunts and groans that pepper the trailer. But actually, this is a kind of like a survival, almost like a survival horror Tomb Raider, in that that's what they're kind of pitching it as, in that you have to survive against the elements and kind of find your way in this really quite bleak looking environment that they're kind of showing. And it already looks artistically, you know, a million times more interesting than some of the stuff that's in the rest of the Tomb Raider canon. You know, that big bay that we've kind of seen in the trailer of ships from lots and lots of different time periods all washed up onto the shore. And that to me sounds absolutely amazing. I genuinely cannot wait to kind of see what they're going to do with it. And maybe it's all kind of like marketing spin and all that sort of stuff. But if they do kind of take it in this, it's one woman against the world, I think that that's really interesting, because that's actually kind of one of the core themes, I think, that kind of runs through the rest of the Tomb Raider games.
I think I'd agree with you. For me personally, I've never really been excited about Tomb Raider games. I got my PlayStation, I think 1999. So this was after Tomb Raider had been released, and I didn't play it then. And as we discussed earlier, I didn't really play anything till Tomb Raider Legend, and I've played a couple of games since then, and I've enjoyed them, but I've never been excited about them. When Underworld came out, I was not overly excited about it. But looking at the way they seem to be going with this, and they do seem to just think, okay, what's happened has happened. Let's put that to one side. Let's do our version of Tomb Raider, and they can go right back to the start. So they don't have to tread over old ground like they did with Anniversary, but they can just do exactly what they want. And as you were saying, the trailer. I mean, I do like trailers, and I do like when they can do something interesting, and I like elements of it. I mean, to be fair, you can look at the trailer and see elements of Uncharted in it. For example, in the trailer, she's leaping off the boat as it's sinking. You'd see that in a game like Uncharted, and I think it's very exciting for me. And I can imagine getting to the time when it comes out and getting it on a pre-order or getting it when it first comes out, because it does look like a game that I would really enjoy.
I mean, I'm excited. I'd agree, 10 out of 10. I mean, because it taps into, for me, the sense of the unknown again. For me, I didn't actually think of Uncharted. I thought of Lost. You know, that sort of sense of tapping into this fascination with the unknown and a sense of mystery about this place. Why are, as Pete says, all these ships here? Where is this island? And to bring in a point Sam made, a really interesting point, the fact is, the reason why Lara jumps about is because she's got instinct and initiative that has come from years and years of exploring tombs. She knows where the next handhold is because she knows this place. She's read about it beforehand in either her father's journals or whatever. Here we've got an environment that is new to her, A, because she's been stranded here, and B, because she's very young. She's just come out of college, I think it is, and she's going to find adventure, she says in the trailer, but instead adventure finds her, which is a kind of a cliched expression, but it's true. She's not going in there with this sense of omniscience. She's not going to a place that she's read about in books. She's clued up, she's prepared, she's got her pistols loaded with infinite ammo, she's got her medipacks and things like that, she's got all her flares. She's dumped here, and she's got to fend for herself. And I watched the gameplay trailer as well, and what really piqued my interest was I couldn't see. When she enters into this huge cave, she has to kind of escape. She wakes up hanging upside down. She has to escape from this means, almost like MacGyver, and land on the floor. And she doesn't make this sort of like gymnastic and balletic landing, graceful landing. She lands on her shoulder. It really hurts. And ow. She gets up and she gets into another clearing. You know, she's almost up to her neck in water in places, having to get squeezed through these tight gaps. And she has to kind of find a way out. And you get to this one area, and for me watching, I was thinking, well, how the hell would I solve this? There's no logic to it. I can't understand this. And obviously the game tester shows you all the ways and doing, oh, that's pretty clever. I would never have thought about that. That's what excited me. I'm having the best of both worlds. I'm having the old school puzzles that I had in the earlier games, but I've got the really good and fluid visuals of the newer games together at last. That's what excited me.
I think you can kind of compare just how you're discussing it there, Chris. You could compare it in a similar way to the James Bond film Casino Royale, where for years you'd had Bond as this character who always in a suit, always smart, always knew what to do, always could do it, always won the day in the most elaborate ways possible. And then Casino Royale came along and they took it down to the basics and they made it raw, and it hurt when he got hurt. And as you're saying there, with Lara, in the past, she would have done a gymnastic, flip out of any kind of situation she was in, land gracefully, and then on she went. As you're saying there, she falls and she hurts herself, and you can feel the pain coming off. And I think that's another thing that's very exciting, because they're doing something different, and it's a whole new thing to see Lara Croft get hurt. Sam, what are your views on it? Looking at like the training, the different things that we've been talking about, are you as excited as us, or are you still a little bit wary?
I think it'll be interesting. My biggest interest in it is the fact that it is called Tomb Raider. It's not Lara Croft Tomb Raider. As I went on to explain in my podcast, Lara Croft is only who she is when she's in the game of a Tomb Raider. It is that location in the game that makes her who she is. It's within that philosophy that defines her character. Whenever she's presented anywhere outside that, in a book, in a film, or a graphic novel, authors have problems because she's not in the video game. So here, the emphasis on Lara as a character is completely not forgotten about, but it's not the precursor to the adventure anymore. It's not Lara Croft Tomb Raider. It is just Tomb Raider. You have this feeling that this game is going to enlighten us to the character. In terms of the game itself, it looks interesting. For me, mechanically, it could dive into the realms where there was, in the gameplay demo, the 15 minutes that they showed at E3, there was far too many quick time events for me to make me think that mechanically this is going to be quite a leap of faith rather than quite a linear and directed experience. But of course, what they show you at E3 is a very linear and directed experience for a purpose. There was also another element of it where, to solve puzzles, you have a thing called intuition, which when you trigger, Lara basically highlights areas of the environment that can be used. It's the binoculars that she uses in Legend that tell her, oh, this is something mechanical, this moves, this is something that can be broken, this is a part of a puzzle. So that's going to be an interesting mechanic in terms of, this is intuition that she's had from the beginning and she's going to be using that to get out of this situation. As far as it goes as a retcon as well, that also is interesting, but it also sort of concerns me that they are throwing away quite a lot of Lara's past. It's such a huge gamble to literally start from the beginning and have her running on a timeline that's in a modern age. She hasn't grown up and been introduced to this age. She grows up within this age, and that's just going to make a huge difference to how she addresses problems, her relationships with family members, her attitude towards life. It's just going to change the whole aesthetic of the whole game, and I'm excited for it. I really am, because it looks like it is generally going to be something new, but I'm not overly assured that it's going to be something new, but I think there are some things to be concerned about within it.
For some people out there, I was very skeptical when I saw this. I love the idea of it, I love the look of it, but it kind of really annoyed me that you know how people say that every, I think, is it odd or even number Star Trek film is rubbish. Well, for me, Tomb Raider games, they come in threes. They come in a set of three, and there's been 3 sets of 3 so far. So we have Tomb Raider to Tomb Raider 3, which is, as Sam said in the first InRetroSpect, they play by old gaming standards, as he called it. As you said, Pete, it's punishing. You know, this is before analog, as it were, where you're using micro tapping of the direction buttons. You know, it's very hard. Everything's at, you know, right angles. It's very constructivist in that sense. Then we have the second trilogy, which is the Tomb Raider: The Last Revelation through Chronicles to Angel of Darkness, which explores the Von Croy story. We're kind of opening up the Lara Croft backstory. And they did a bold move. They killed Lara Croft off, essentially, and then revitalized her, brought her back as this kind of strange gothic, emo, denim jacket wearing woman. And then they revamped her again for the third trilogy. And for the first 2, I've never understood the point of rebooting it. It seemed like they were just bored, or we've screwed that up, let's do something different, rather than trying to work with what we've got. However, when Crystal Dynamics came into the fold, when I finished Underworld, I felt that, yes, this is actually right. This is a trilogy, they've ended it here. Brilliant. I understand now why Tomb Raider's going to go in a different direction now. Because what they did, Crystal Dynamics, which was very clever with that trilogy, I've not seen it before, was that they managed to take a story from right at the beginning of the Tomb Raider saga and weave it into a new plot. With only very minor editorial tweaks, which we spoke about in the first InRetroSpect. I mean, they brought back the character of Natla as the villain. And what they did with Natla was similar to basically what Arthur Conan Doyle did with Professor Moriarty in the Sherlock Holmes stories. Moriarty only appears in one story, and that is The Final Problem, where he kills Sherlock Holmes and they kill each other, they fall off Reichenbach Falls. But the way that Conan Doyle writes the character Moriarty is that he writes them almost as if you feel he's always been there. And they kind of do that with Natla. You kind of feel that because of the character's resurfacing in Underworld, you kind of feel that she's always been there through Tomb Raider 2, Tomb Raider 3, Tomb Raider 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. She's always been there. And it's such a bold move. And I think that to make it go completely full circle, there's that sense of, you know, the cyclical arrangement. It's a very contained trilogy here. It can't go any further, which is why I feel that it is such a natural progression here, and why this is actually the only justified reboot in the Tomb Raider saga.
Here on InRetroSpect, we have discovered every artifact, discussed every talking point, and looked at what Lara's lasting legacy on the gaming industry will be. But now it is time for us here to bid farewell to our heroine and the world she inhabits. If you have missed any of this series, you can still catch them on iTunes, the Zune Marketplace, and at InRetroSpectPodcast.com. And whilst you're there, why not leave us a review and let people know where they can find the best in gaming content. Finally, I'd like to thank Pete, Chris and Sam for their fantastic and insightful podcasts over the past few weeks. And thank you, the listener, for joining us on this journey across 15 years of exploration and the innovation of our gaming culture. So now is the time for the InRetroSpect team to hang up their satchel of guns, grenades and medipacks and leave the tomb raiding to a younger, more agile model. Until next time, goodbye.
Well, that went well.
It went very well, huh?
Yeah.
So...
I mean, shouldn't we take it? Hang on. You're kidding me. Hang on. Don't go anywhere. Hang on.
What's up?
Chris?
Fuck's sake. I think someone's just gone off my car.
What?
No, I kid you not. I mean, it's dark outside. I can't really see it, but I swear I parked it there. Someone's gone off in my car.